have been celebrating Black History Month in this month of February. We have been diving into the timeless and the glorious work of Bell Hooks. This right here, all about love. What a glorious, glorious book that is. We've been unpacking it together this month. And the first week of February, we talked about divine love. And then the second week, we explored the idea of living by a love ethic. And Shelley did such a beautiful job last week, didn't she? Talking about redemptive love and healing love. Wasn't that glorious? Yeah, so beautiful. Now we move into this time this week where we get to really share together this concept that Bell Hooks talks about when angels speak of love. And this is her last chapter in the book, and it's a very rich one. I want to start by saying, our teaching is a practical teaching. It is a very grounded, very practical teaching. We just shared earlier in the service, every single week we say our mission, that we provide practical tools for spiritual and global transformation. It's on our website. It's our mission. So how the heck is a conversation about angels practical? Oh, buckle up, I'm going to get to it. I know that it sounds pretty woo-woo to some of you, and that is totally fine. Just stick with me. I am going to talk today about the intersection of science and spirituality and how angels fit into all of that, and how the ancient wisdom of the angels and the angelic realm is connected to us in our daily lives, helping to make our lives better and the lives of those around us better and more just. The great Reverend Dr. Howard Thurman wrote, "There must be always remaining in every life some place for the singing of angels, some place for that which in itself is breathlessly beautiful, despite all the crassness of life, despite all the hardness of life, despite all the hard discords of life. Life is saved by the singing of angels." I hear a little angel singing in the back. Life is saved by the singing of angels. Prior to the pandemic, 7 out of 8 Americans believed in angels. Now, just 3 years later, polls and data show that 8 out of 10 Americans now believe in angels or some form of something having to do with the angelic realm. And this makes perfect sense to me. Many people experience the feeling of the angelic presence or the connection to the spirit realm or the divine, whatever word works for you. They're all interchangeable during heightened human experiences. Thousands upon thousands of people have reported experiencing an angelic presence in a near-death experience, disasters on the battlefield, when a loved one has just passed or is getting ready to pass, or as I have experienced when falling in love with my husband, or being at the birth of a child. I experienced an angelic force field of love, not only at the births and the adoptions of our own children in that moment, but also witnessing the birth of my niece and 2 of my nephews. I talk often around here about this idea that the veil is thin between the seen and unseen sides of life. But how is any of that seeming woo-woo to some and normal to others actually practical? I'll share one of the practical experiences that I felt recently. At the beginning of this month, I was actually scheduled to speak. But just a few days before Sunday, my husband and I got a text, one of the dreaded texts that parents get these days that are far more routine than they ever should be. The text that said that our daughter's high school was shut down because there was fear of an intruder with a gun. Thank you, little angel. It's hard to talk about because it was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. Her high school was shut down for 4 hours. Internet was spotty. There was very little communication. Of course, I got in my car and drove as close to the school as I could. It was blocked off for streets. There were helicopters everywhere. Sheriffs had rushed in. They were sweeping the school floor by floor. There was an adjacent elementary school. Kindergartners were sheltering in place. And what I experienced in this, I want you to know everyone was okay. Everything ended up to be all right. This man was apprehended and arrested. What ended up happening was this cadre of human angels rushed in. Yes? I was sitting in my car and terrified out of my mind for that first hour not being able to reach our daughter. And I was sitting in the car and I could see her school, but I couldn't reach her. And I immediately texted my prayer angels. I have several different groups of prayer angels. I texted all of them. And every single person texted me immediately back and said, I'm stopping what I'm doing and I'm praying right now. I'm in prayer right now. I'm knowing the highest and the best for you right now and for Liza Rose. I know everything is surrounded by love and by God itself. So right in that moment in the car, I knew that I had angels around me praying, not only for my family, but all the families. And on what is normally a very small kind of two-way street to get to the high school, the way that the roads were cut off, we were only able to go in one way. And we were 4 cars wide, just at a standstill, parked, because we couldn't get to the school. All the parents on this road, 4 cars wide. And what I saw was the most beautiful outpouring of love and support from these angel parents. We were all in the same situation in that moment. And I saw people getting out of their cars and going, hey, and going over to someone and hugging them. I saw strangers connecting on the sidewalk and clearly supporting each other and holding each other up. It was an outpouring of angels among us. So if you are someone who is on the fence about believing in angels from the other side, I invite you to lean into what is comfortable for you in this conversation and lean into the absolute truth that we are here to be angels for each other. We are here to be angels for one another in every possible way. Everything ended up being just fine. Our daughter is just fine. The students are just fine. I am going to continue to dedicate my life to gun reform. And I'll do it with the angels, here and on the other side of life. So, I know that that's a dramatic story, but oftentimes it's like these things, these big life things, these near-death experiences that I just mentioned, these angelic moments, the moments of birth, the moments of falling in love or marriage, these big moments, these scary moments. All of this in life, all of this reminds us that we are absolutely 100% not alone, not here on the seen or the unseen side of life. So how is this practical, she asks. Dr. John Hagelin received his PhD in physics from Harvard, and is responsible for the transcendental meditation movement in the United States. He wrote, "A great unification is now taking place between science and spirituality. The most advanced discoveries of modern science are rising to reaffirm the timeless wisdom of the great religious and spiritual traditions of our culture." I remember when I was in grad school, in ministerial school, we spent a lot of time studying quantum physics and wave particles and string theory and unified field theory, which are all just fancy words for how everything is connected to everything and everything is energy. And I remember wondering at the time that if we are all truly one and everything is really connected, then isn't the quantum field of energy that science speaks of, the atoms and the protons and all the things, isn't that then also all spirit? And wouldn't it follow then that science itself is a form of spirit, of God, of source, of what some call the angelic realm? Now, I come from a family of academics. Both of my parents, who are retired now, were brilliant college professors. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. Hi. And back then, when I was in grad school, understanding that all humans were one, of course, that was clear to me. That was very clear, and that was easy. That was clear. But I remember being concerned about thinking that the unified field theory that science proclaimed and the united field of consciousness that my spirituality taught me could be one and the same, that science and spirituality could actually be one thing, not science and spirituality, but that it all was a form of divine intelligence that was spirituality. That science and spirituality were inextricably connected, just like humans. That science itself was not only an aspect of the divine, but the divine in action. Following this, the theory then is that science is indeed spiritual. Are you following me? The thing is, I remember back then, coming from such an academic kind of culture, I remember stopping myself short and thinking to myself, well, I can't prove that. We talk about in New Thought, it's where science and spirituality meet. We don't call them the same thing. It's the science of mind and spirit. And I remember thinking to myself, this is very woo-woo and not very academic. I had a little bit of shame. And I was in seminary, I was in ministerial school. You know, I was a practitioner. I knew that we were all one, but my stumbling block was science. Because there's a part of my brain that is very logical, right? And so this was part of my growing edge. 16 years later, with countless demonstrations, what some would call miracles, I know, of course, that it's all one, even the most science-y of things. But I remember this was the one place for me personally where I separated it. Unconsciously, I separated science and spirituality, God and science, not wanting to be embarrassed by the scientists around me. We humans like to separate things, don't we? We like to put things in comfortable boxes. Science is over here, spirituality is over here, academia is over here, ancient wisdom is over here. The seen side of life is over here. The unseen side of life that sometimes maybe we can feel is way over there. But when we do that, when we compartmentalize what is meant to be the grand tapestry of God, of the divine itself, the vast totality of the body of knowledge that includes science, along with the ancient alchemists and the seers and the shamans, and the knowledge of the medicine healers and the midwives. When we separate all of these little things into boxes over the centuries, all of these ideas, when we separate them, we are separating the very ground of our being and the air that we breathe, and we are creating a house divided. All of it is spirit. All the woo-woo stuff and all the science is God, is spirit, is source. We have an opportunity to unite those things in our brains and our hearts and our minds and live it in the world. Homeopathic medicine along with allopathic medicine. We have enough division in the world as it is, yes? When we speak here about oneness, we are not only speaking about the oneness of human beings, but we're speaking of the oneness of the natural world, of every single atom and particle and moment and breath and miracle. The very first sentence in Ernest Holmes's extraordinary textbook, In the Science of Mind, written in 1926, it says, "We all look forward to the day when science and religion shall walk hand in hand through the visible to the invisible." He wrote that in 1926. When we talk of angels, we are talking about faith in the unseen, faith in the invisible, as well as faith in the angels of our better nature within each one of us in any given moment. There is a beautiful story that Bell Hooks talks about in her chapter, in the last chapter of this book. And it's the biblical story of Jacob. Now, for those of you who are here for the first time, let me be really clear. The stories in the Hebrew and Christian Bibles are just that. They're stories. They're metaphor. They were actually never meant to be taken literally. That's happened very recently in human history. So the brilliance of this ancient wisdom is for all of us. I could do an entire workshop just on the Jacob journey alone. I'm going to give you a teeny tiny little piece. So Jacob is this guy. He's a man. He has faults. He also is capable of great love. He falls in love with Rachel, and he's told that he has to work for 7 years in order to be able to marry her, which he does. He's capable of love. He's also capable of error and mistakes. He deceives his twin brother Esau and his father. And as a result of that deception, as a result of his manipulation and his lies, he has to leave. He's forced to leave his home. And lots of time goes by, and there's all kinds of adventures, all the things. And then he finally decides, or rather, life forces him to head back home, to go back to his twin brother Esau, to beg for forgiveness. This is really hard for him to do. Anyone, you ever have to ask forgiveness to someone? It's hard. It's part of the human journey. It's part of the human experience. Well, this really cool thing happens to Jacob. Really cool. He has a nightmare. In the Bible, it's described as he's wrestling with an angel or he's wrestling with God. What we understand, because in the Bible, every single character is an aspect of our own humanness and our own journey of consciousness, our soul growth. What's really happening here, what they're really teaching here, is that Jacob is coming to terms with the parts of himself that he has harmed. He's having to face his own errors, his own mistakes, and own them. He's having to really feel the shame of what he has done, because that is what he feels. He feels ashamed for the ways in which he has harmed or hurt others. And so this incredible moment in this story, he spends this night wrestling the angel. The Zohar, the 13th century mystical text that is the text for those who follow Kabbalah, which is the mystical a sect of Judaism. In the Zohar, it explains that Jacob, what that's all about is he is wrestling with his ego and spirit and God. It's like classic shadow work, everyone. I mean, he's literally looking at the aspects of himself that he is finally ready to change, to transform. And what does he have to do? He has to name it to transcend it. Once he goes through that dark night of the soul, once he goes through the wrestling that he does in this incredible story, he does something even more extraordinary because he has the courage to do that. He has the courage to go through that struggle, right? He knows he has to make amends, but before we make amends to anything, we have to own what we have done and all the feelings and sit with the discomfort. This story is reminding us that when we sit with the discomfort of something that we have done, a mistake, an error, we are still held by light and love. That is part of the transformative process. Because what happens is right at the end, right before the sun begins to rise, Jacob demands of the angel who is present, because we are never alone, as I just shared, he demands that the angel give him a blessing. Isn't that interesting? He says, give me a blessing. And the blessing changes him. In other words, whatever difficulty, challenge, struggle you have moved through or are currently moving through, there is a blessing in it for you. There is always a blessing in it for you. There is something for you to learn, to grow from. It just is. For me, when I was sitting in the car, hands shaking, texting my prayer partners, my blessing in that moment was knowing that I have an incredible support system around me no matter what happens. I got to remember that. As a senior minister, sometimes I can forget that. I got the opportunity to ask for help, right? As disjointed as it was in the moment. And so Jacob is given this blessing. Now, Jacob in Hebrew, the word, I'm sorry for all of you named Jacob, the Hebrew meaning, the original meaning, is deceiver. I love you, Jacobs. But that's also the way in the oral tradition that it was explained. As soon as we meet Jacob in the old world, they knew, oh, he's working on that part of the human experience, those of us who've moved through anything around manipulation or deceiving or lying, right? Anybody? Ever? That's the Jacob in us. But here's the great news. Here's what is so beautiful about it. As soon as Jacob goes through the experience and sits with the discomfort and wrestles with it, names it, and then asks for a blessing from it, the angel gives him a new name. And what is his new name? Israel. Israel. What's fascinating to me is that later in Genesis, Jacob sometimes goes back from Israel to Jacob. You see it's salt and pepper because it's the human experience. So just know that there are times where we have transformed something and we've moved on to something else, and we're always given an opportunity. Are you going to go back? Are you going to go back to Jacob? Or are you going to stay in Israel? So I ask you, where in your own life are you wrestling? Are you wrestling with something? Are you carrying any shame about anything right now? Or is there perhaps something that might be wanting to be healed from within you, or cleared within yourself, or perhaps with another person? Bell Hooks wrote, "As long as we feel shame, we can never believe ourselves worthy of love. We need to speak our shame and our pain courageously in order to recover." We need to speak our shame and our pain courageously in order to recover. Recover. Think about recovery groups. That's exactly what they do. When you meet with a practitioner and they just sit and hold the space, it's so beautiful to have a practitioner session and have someone hold that space while you are wrestling with your transformation, with your struggle. I love that this chapter in her book is called When Angels Speak of Love. Because really what Bell Hooks is reminding us here is that whatever it is that we are moving through right now, whatever challenge, whatever is up for you right now, there is always a blessing available. There is always good. There is always good standing at the ready to come out of it as you make it more conscious. I say so often, the work that we do here is making the unconscious conscious, right? Bringing any shadowed parts of ourselves to light. This is that story. This is that opportunity. And as you think about this week, as you think about the ways in which you can move into a new name about something for yourself, I invite you to do it with such compassion and gentleness, with the softness and the love of angels. It's interesting to me that this conversation around angels, in the ancient world, in indigenous cultures and earth-based religions, angels or spirit guides were considered to be ancestors. I'm curious if anyone here, if you think of a family member or a friend as an angel in your life, or a guardian angel, or a presence in your life. Yeah, that is ancient wisdom. It's also fascinating that when you think about the Hebrew and Christian Bibles, the angels, none of those angels had wings. Wings didn't show up until 400 years after the birth of Jesus of Nazareth in art. Why? To remind us that we can be angels here on earth for each other. That was a huge part of that. If there is a situation in your life, or someone in your life that could use a blessing, or your word of love, or your forgiveness, I invite you to lean into that this week, to see where in your life you could be an angel for someone else. How could you pay it forward for the blessings that you have received? And I invite you to do this with this heart that is open, with this love that we've been talking about all month. Open-hearted, grounded, practical love. So this week, I invite you to notice all the things around you. I invite you to bravely open your heart in faith to the angels, to the angelic realm, to spirit, to all that is occurring, all the things, all the ways, all the good. Name it as spirit. When someone is kind to you, when someone extends a helping hand, when someone out of the blue gives you a call, I invite you to, in the moment, you don't have to say it out loud if you're not comfortable, but in the moment, recognize that's God in action. That's spirit. Yes, that's a person being nice. But think what this world would be like if we recognized that that was actually the divine in action through that person in every moment. When you notice that you are being particularly kind to someone, I invite you to stop and say, oh, that's God in me, honey. What? That's spirit in shoes, in action in you. This week, I invite you to notice where in your life you can be an angel for someone else. And lastly, I invite you to open up to the idea that you are never, ever, ever alone. That not only is spirit, is love, is source at the center of your being, working through you. The angels of our better nature are at work, that is our God self. But that truly you are never, ever alone, no matter what. That you are surrounded by this infinite, infinite energy, this field of consciousness that is love, that is God, that is spirit itself. Hi, friends. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that this message supported you. We are a nonprofit, and we do all of this based solely on the gifts that you give. No amount is too small or too large. You can text to give. You can go online and check out our website. We're doing so much. You can give that way. Thank you so much for being here, for being a part of this community, and for supporting this message of bringing more light, more love, and spirit-led social action out into the world. Thank you. You're loved. So loved.